Today, I'm reviewing the flagship gaming laptop from Lenovo's lineup, the Legion 9. Last year, I somehow missed the chance to get to know it. But this year, I got my hands on the latest second generation for review. So, let's get started. I'll begin, as always, with the exterior. While the general features of the Legions have been retained, the 9 has some differences in decoration, proportions, and even port placement. The first thing that catches the eye is, of course, the lid. It's multi-layered and made with carbon fiber. Each unit has a slightly different pattern. By the way, it also feels textured to the touch. The laptop itself is entirely made of metal with a black matte finish. In terms of practicality, it's quite good. The lid doesn't get covered in fingerprints at all. The main body gets smudged a bit but is easy to clean. Only the keyboard will carefully collect traces of your activity, but that's how almost all black keyboards behave. Speaking of the keyboard, one of its obvious advantages is its design. It's the same classic Legion keyboard with short travel and a full numeric keypad. All the convenient keyboard shortcuts are in place for switching performance modes, lighting options, and screen refresh rates. There's a new Copilot button instead of the right control key, as advertised by all manufacturers. And it has full per-key RGB backlighting. The 9 comes with a set of ceramic keycaps, mechanisms, and a tool for replacing them. This way, you can customize the keyboard a bit to your liking, at least the keys you use most often in games. It's hard not to notice that the keyboard is significantly shifted from the screen towards the middle of the body. As I understand it, this was done to accommodate a more efficient cooling system. Consequently, the space for the palms and the glass touchpad has decreased. It's fine for me, but it might bother some people. It really depends on your working style with the laptop. It's also worth mentioning the power button. It still changes color depending on the laptop's operating mode. In the 9, it also includes a fingerprint scanner for convenient unlocking. Besides the keyboard backlighting, the Legion 9 boasts colorful illumination around the entire perimeter of the body. There are strips across the full width at the front and back, and RGB lighting on the lid logo. You can customize each element individually, from a specific key on the keyboard to the logo, using Lenovo Spectrum within the Lenovo Vantage app. Or you can simply choose a preset from the available schemes. It's a full package for RGB enthusiasts. Now that we've admired the aesthetics, let's go over the ports. Legions have always had plenty of them. And as I like, most of the ports are at the back, though there are some on the sides too. On the left, near the hinge, there's a combo audio jack. Next is a full-sized SD card reader, which creators will appreciate. On the right, near the hinge, there's a full-sized USB-A 3.2 Gen 1 port. Then there's a physical webcam switch and a USB-C 3.2 Gen 1 port. The back is more interesting. Here, in a row, we have a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, another USB-A 3.2 Gen 1 port with always-on function, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, an HDMI 2.1 port, and Lenovo's proprietary power connector. All the rear ports also have illuminated labels. It's a very rich set. The screen deserves special mention. It's truly premium. A 16-inch mini LED panel with excellent characteristics. The resolution is 3200 by 2000 pixels, brightness for HDR content up to 1200 nits, 100% coverage of DCI-P3, Adobe RGB, and sRGB, a refresh rate of 165 Hz, and support for Dolby Vision and NVIDIA G-Sync. The resolution is a bit overkill in my opinion. For a 16-inch screen, 2.5K like in simpler Legions would have been sufficient. Otherwise, the screen is fantastic for gaming, work, and watching videos, especially HDR videos. The brightness and true blacks remind me of OLEDs. By the way, I was expecting the mini LED to have a halo effect, where a slight glow appears around bright objects on a dark background, but the engineers managed to handle it somehow. I didn't notice anything glaring. Just an observation, the top lid doesn't open to 180 degrees like most Legions, but to a smaller angle. The webcam above the screen records video in full HD. It's on par with other Legions with similar cameras. There are also a couple of microphones nearby. In Lenovo Vantage, you can adjust the microphone settings to suit your specific needs. It's worth mentioning that the Legion 9 supports TechBear software for eye tracking. It can dim the screen when you step away from the laptop and, for example, expand control in some games. A few words about the sound. There are still two 2-watt speakers facing downwards. The quality and volume seemed a bit better than on my Legion 7, but not drastically. You can adjust the sound in the Nahimic app if needed. Let's move on to the internals. Of course, it has the newest laptop hardware, and even more. Here's the list. It features a powerful top-tier Intel Core i9-14900HX processor, 8 performance cores and 16 efficiency cores, totaling 32 threads, a whopping 64 GB of DDR5 5600 RAM, a fast 2TB SSD from Hynix. The Intel Killer AX16 wireless module handles Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. And the cherry on top is the fastest laptop GPU currently available, the NVIDIA RTX 4090 with 16 GB of VRAM and a TGP of up to 175 watts. Of course, there's room for upgrades. You can swap out the RAM in the 2 available slots. There's an additional slot for a second M2 SSD besides the system SSD, and you can also try to replace the Wi-Fi module. In the previous generation, there was a nuance. The motherboard was inverted. While access to the SSD slots was open, upgrading the RAM required additional disassembly. I'm not sure if that's still the case this year. I didn't dare to take it apart myself. Most likely, it's the same. I can only say that with 64 GB on board, there's minimal reason to change anything unless you're really bored. Now, performance. In real life, this laptop easily handles any work tasks. And I'm not talking about Excel and Photoshop, but something much more resource-intensive like 3D or 4K video editing. For the numbers enthusiasts, as always, I ran my set of synthetic tests. Here are the results. Geekbench 6, Cinebench single-core and multi-core, Corona benchmark, old and new versions. Finally, PC Mark 10. I tested the GPU in several 3D Mark tests. Here are the results in Time Spy, Port Royal, Speedway. Finally, games. As always, 3 games from different years with varying levels of graphics. I tested in native resolution, only with active discrete graphics and in performance mode. For test validity, I chose ready-made presets in the game without changing anything. I made only one change in the methodology. Since the resolution of 3200 by 2000 in games seems too much to me, I also ran the games in 2.5K and Full HD where possible. For brevity, I'll call the native resolution 3K. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. DLSS balance, highest graphics preset. Average frame rate in 3K, 169 frames per second. In 2.5K, 192 frames per second. In Full HD, 208 frames per second. Forza Horizon 5. DLSS balance, extreme graphics preset. Average frame rate in 3K, 110 frames per second. In 2.5K, 116 frames per second. In Full HD, 130 frames per second. With frame generation enabled, the results are as follows. Average frame rate in 3K, 130 frames per second. In 2.5K, 154 frames per second. In Full HD, 165 frames per second. Finally, Cyberpunk 2077, the heaviest preset ray tracing overdrive, DLSS on auto. Average frame rate in 3K, 39 frames per second. In 2.5K, 54 frames per second. In Full HD, 66 frames per second. With frame generation enabled, the results are as follows. Average frame rate in 3K, 61 frames per second. In 2.5K, 81 frames per second. In Full HD, 103 frames per second. A short interim summary. The Legion 9 easily handles all current games at maximum settings, and there's even some headroom for the future. Only full-sized PCs with desktop components are more powerful, but that's if you're using a normal 2.5K resolution. The native 3K at 16 inches doesn't visually improve the game and adds unnecessary load on the hardware. In terms of pure performance, there's no difference with the Legion Pro 7 with the same processor and graphics card. Alright, I could mention the special separate AI chip that balances the load, the liquid metal, and the additional liquid cooling loop for the GPU, but I have no idea how to test their impact on the laptop's performance. In terms of noise level, the cooling system is neither louder nor quieter than my Legion 7. It's the usual average Legion level. So, I'll touch on 2 other aspects regarding the hardware. First, overclocking. By default, A slight GPU overclock is available in Lenovo Vantage. If you enable the Legion CPU optimization option in the BIOS, a section for CPU overclocking will also appear in the app. I wouldn't recommend most people to mess with it. With default settings, both overclocks combined give a very slight performance boost. Sometimes, there's no boost at all. Here are the synthetic test results. PC Mark 10 and 3D Mark. The second aspect is how the hardware performs under prolonged load, the so-called plateau. Under prolonged stress test load, the CPU temperature stabilizes at 90 to 96 degrees, power consumption around 125 to 130 watts, and P-core frequency at 3500 MHz. If you stress the GPU for a long time, the temperature stabilizes around 82 degrees, and TGP is almost the maximum 175 watts. In games, of course, results vary from game to game. I'll take Cyberpunk as an example with maximum settings, frame generation, and 3K resolution. Due to the high resolution, the CPU is almost idle, with load rarely exceeding 23% and temperature not above 80 degrees. This means the GPU has to work for both, and the load is indeed constantly above 90%. But for some reason, the temperature is around 75 degrees, and TGP averages no higher than 130 watts. It feels like something is holding back the GPU in the game. Maybe it's specific to Cyberpunk. If anyone has reasonable ideas about what's happening, share them in the comments. A few words about battery life. The laptop has the maximum allowed battery capacity of 99.9 watt-hours. But as with the Legion Pro 7, you shouldn't expect much battery life away from the outlet. However, the package was a pleasant surprise. Besides the usual 330-watt brick for gaming laptops, there was also a compact 140-watt power adapter in the box. It might not fully unleash the laptop's gaming potential, but on the go, if you only need internet, some office work, and watching movies, this charger is perfect. Finally, let's talk about the proprietary Legion Vantage app for laptop customization. Just a few reminders. This is where you can change the laptop's thermal mode. Besides the familiar quiet, balanced, and performance modes, there's a custom mode with a bunch of manual settings. Here, you can also choose the mode of the integrated and discrete graphics cards, up to exclusively enabling the discrete one. Another important feature is the battery charging options: fast, night, and extend lifespan. A new addition is the eSports section. As the name suggests, it includes some extra gaming perks. I found the screen color space switching option particularly important. And there's a fun proprietary app likely for game streamers, Lenovo Avatar. For online streaming, you can replace yourself with an animated character that mimics your facial expressions. Now the price and conclusions. The Legion 9 in this maxed-out configuration costs more than $4,500. On one hand, the price is impressive. On the other, it's somewhat of a premium product. I'll try to explain as best as I can. If you need raw top performance, the Pro 7 will suffice. You'll get almost the same frame rate in games. However, with the 9, you get an additional better screen with excellent brightness and true blacks, a huge amount of memory by laptop standards, an all-metal body, an extra compact power adapter, a fingerprint scanner, full RGB, and an impressive carbon lid. These aren't the most essential details, but such a combination of everything in one laptop isn't meant for the mass market. There's a whole range of Legions for any budget and taste, but for those who want more and have the budget, that's when the 9 comes into play. That's been it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.